Hi there, welcome to this ESRA short movie on the prediction of quality of survey questions through multi-trait, multi-method models. My name is Schouten. I'm going to talk to two experts, Lydia Repke from GESIS and Daniel Oberski from Utrecht University. We'll do the interview at the hand of the well-known SQP web application. So this is the SQP 3.0 website. It's now hosted by GESIS in Germany. So this is the starting page. What I've been doing is I've added a number of questions, and I'm now very curious what is the quality of these questions. So in order to go there, in the starting screen, I have to log in, of course. So here I am. This is the database. I could also look at the quality of questions that are submitted by others, but of course I'm interested in the study that I've been adding. So the first thing I have to do is I have to look for the study, which is called Smart Survey Perceptions. Let's apply the filter, and then I'll find 6 questions. The questionnaire actually is a Dutch one, but there's also an English model questionnaire. So I added the Dutch version of 2 questions, question 10, question 11. I added English versions of the same questions, 10 and 11. And in addition, I added a question 9 and a question 14, but we'll talk about that later. So what you see here are the questions, and they have been scored on a number of characteristics that are the input to the MTMM model. If I click on the question, so let's, for example, look at question 10, then you see the Dutch text over here, the answer categories, and there's the quality prediction. So it has an overall quality of 0.532. So we will talk to Daniel and Lydia whether that's actually good or bad, but that's for later. And if we look at the question, we can also look in more detail where it comes from. So it gives a reliability, a validity, a combination of the two, which is the number that I just mentioned on the screen. And then there is a further elaboration of some of the coefficients in the models. So I would say a 0.532 is not too good. It doesn't sound very good to me, but we'll see. On the right-hand side, you can see all of the characteristics that I've been coding. So quite a few. So let's get back to the database and the questions, because I was looking at the Dutch version, which has a 0.532 prediction. Let's go to the English one. Basically the same. So now we have the English text. It's a question about going smart and whether respondents would be concerned about the data. So here there is not yet a quality prediction because I haven't filled in all of the codes. I still have to do that, and I will do that later. If I go to the question 11, it's approximately the same quality. You could say 0.529 in the Dutch version, and in the English version is not much better, 0.533. So they're basically the language in this case, which also means that the number of words that is used in the introduction and in the question is not that different. It doesn't have that much of an influence. So are all these questions that have the same score? Here's a question 14, was even slightly worse. We'll hear later whether these are good or bad scores. Interestingly, for my question number 9, which I have only entered in the English version, I made a quality prediction myself, and there was another user, which I don't know who that was, did the same thing, but apparently has different scores because the overall quality prediction is slightly different. It's lower. So that must be that I've been coding slightly differently than someone else. And this is also something we're going to discuss with Daniel and Lydia, of course. So we're going to talk to Lydia Repke and Daniel Oberski about SQP and multi-trade, multi-method models. So Lydia is a researcher at GESIS at survey design and methodology, and also an active team lead. She's heavily involved in the new SQP version, SQP 3.0. So welcome, Lydia.
Hello.
Daniel is a professor on social data science at Utrecht University, social sciences department. As you know, also been heavily involved in SQP history. Received the award at APOR, I think, in 2014. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
I'm showing the audience a bit of coding myself and some of the predictions. This was an SQP 3.0. Looks like a great software to me. It was very easy to use. But what is what's new here? So I was started out in SQP 2.1, which I think still was at Barcelona, then moved to GESIS. So what's new in 3.0?
Yeah, so there are two different things to say, I guess. One thing is that it's the software change in terms of usability and some functions that were added. And the other thing is that also the content, the prediction is based on change. So maybe I start with the second part. So originally, the way the program developed, and maybe Daniel can say a little bit about that later on, there were MTMM experiments conducted, and based on these MTMM experiments, different versions also of the software were developed. And in the former version, SQP 2.1, I think was about 250 MTMM experiments that were analyzed in approximately 22 countries, I think, and 21 languages. And the predictions were based on that data and worked for these countries and languages. And now in SQP 3.0, we have more than 600 MTMM experiments, I believe, which adds up to more than 6,000 survey items for 28 languages in 33 countries. So the scope is much bigger. I suppose also the predictions or the algorithm is more precise now because it's based on more data than before. So this is on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there are all these new options and functions that you have implemented in SQP. So there is a very cool filter, an advanced filter that allows you to search in this database questions based on their characteristics. So if you're looking for a question on importance that is measured in a bipolar way in Turkish, if it's in the database, you can find it using these very cool filters. So this is something I'm very excited about. And then there are, of course, also other options. You can directly compare different codings in the software. You can replicate questions, copy and paste codings, and then edit them so you don't have to code a similar question all over again. Because, I mean, I think you've already done a few codings, so you know that it might take a little bit to go through coding, and if you have to repeat it over and over again, it might be a little bit annoying. So yeah, there's some functions and options that just help the user to go through it more smoothly.
So if I were to add the same codings to 2.1 as I would do for 3.0, would I get the same predictions, or would you say you also changed the underneath, let's say, the methodology that's beneath it?
No, yeah, definitely the predictions change. We tried different models when we developed the new prediction algorithm. We ended up with the same model, let's say, or the same method that was implemented in 2.1, which was a random forest model. But of course, the predictions changed because also the data changed.
Okay, well, let's get back to how it's being computed and estimated later on. But I'd like to first go back a little bit in time, because SQP, how old is it? 25 years right now? What was the original system somewhere in 2000, 2001 or so?
So for DOS was, I think, the first DOS version was beginning of 2000, and SQP 1.0 for Windows, I think, was published in 2004, Daniel?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So of course I've done a bit of history searching. I everyone knows this was SQP is, of course, more or less initiated by Willem Saris. He did a lot of work on measurement error modeling in the 90s. I think he found that measurement error was greatly estimated or under-evaluated. It should have much more attention, but it's very costly, very time-consuming to do all of these kind of experiments. So maybe help others by coming up with some sort of system. So when did you become involved, Daniel, in SQP? What's the time that you entered?
2004. So I was a student doing well. We didn't have the bachelor master system yet, but I guess nowadays would be a master. And Willem talked about this program that they had, which was a DOS program that did this prediction based on a linear regression. So it was the characteristics of the questions were very similar. Of course, the database of experiments that it was based on was much smaller than it is now because we didn't have ESS in that database back then. And at the time, I was also working as to make some money. I was working as a developer, and I wasn't extremely good at it, but I did have a friend who was very good at it. That's Stijn Kuipers.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I think we can make a nicer program, because it was the program that he had was based on a very old but also very robust interviewing program for the face-to-face computer-assisted interviews that they used to do in Telepanel, and they just programmed SQP into that program. So it was a very versatile interviewing program, but it was, of course, pretty unwieldy to use, especially in 2004. So we made a Windows program, or actually Stijn pretty much made that Windows program, and that was the first version. But the underlying model was the same as it had been before that. There was still that regression model.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the big challenges was to get input, to get studies, to get experiments, because it's of course relying on comparing all kinds of studies. How did that go? You know, was it easy to get a database to start the SQP? You know.
Well, that was all work that had already been done at that point. I don't know if you're aiming to go further in the future, but SQP didn't start in 2000, right? It started actually in 1984, when Andrews came up with the idea to do a kind of meta-analysis. He had a very small one on different MTMM experiments to see like how do different types of ways in which you can ask a question differ in the estimated quality of those questions. And then Willem Saris, he started a kind of program in the early 90s, together with the other people from Austria and Belgium, to collect such data and and when they had collected those data, they did a meta-analysis, a larger meta-analysis of those questions. I think that was done by Annette Scherpenzeel. Which is a paper published in 95 or so. And that was the basis of the first program, SQP program. So I had nothing to do with that, and I didn't have to do experiments or gather results, because that was all work which had been done in the decennium before that. It's really a multi-decennium research project. It's not like you just sit down and, okay, let's do a meta-analysis out of thin air. And then afterwards, the ESS started, or the ESS was already going on, but afterwards I got involved also in the ESS, and they did a lot of FTMM experiments there, and we kept integrating those into the SQP database. And of course, you also have to code the questions and then link those to the estimated quality of those questions. And once that was done, I made a new model that predicts the amount of measurement error in a question based on its characteristics. But that was only done in 2011, so that took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not, I was not in charge of coordinating that effort. That was a huge effort involving lots of different people, including Irmtraut Kaalhofer, who was leading all the coding, Melanie Revia, who was doing many of the analyses of the experiments, and Wiebke Weber, who was also involved in coding and analyzing and organizing things.
I think one of the main maybe motives was to separate variances into different components, to also look at methods, so the way you sort of implement a measure.
Yeah.
So if you look at these early days, of course, this is all based on features. You need to be able to sort of characterize what is that method that you're applying. Do you think that these relatively early days, the set of features that were available or that were considered important was still open? Was it still exploratory in that way, or?
No. It was also a very rigorous process that was very much the joint work of Irmtraut Kaalhofer and Willem Saris. So the idea that they had was, well, basically two ideas. One is very obvious. You can just look in the literature and see what kinds of characteristics of questions people have already studied and have said are important. Things like the number of scale points, for example. That's a very popular topic to study in the survey methodology literature. But what Irmtraut also did was she is a linguist, and she analyzed. She made a kind of framework in which you can analyze a question in terms of the formal linguistic characteristics of that question. So, for example, whether it's a statement or a direct question, and all that kind of stuff. Some of it also comes back in the literature on methodology, but some of it is just based on language. And all those characteristics which they thought would be important, they were coded and used in those meta-analyses. So that's how they came. That it was a whole process. That how they came to this specific set of characteristics. Then later, a few were added, a few were dropped, but the basic set was created in that way.
Okay. No, I've been doing some coding myself. I learned along the way, but what I did realize when I was doing this is that some features are not that easy to code. Of course, there are very helpful instructions in the SQP program. You always get examples, so you can always look at what should I do for this particular predictor or feature. But nonetheless, I can imagine that if you would look at databases, how others did this in their studies, there could be some sensitivity to this. Is that true or not? Is it if you would look at the...
What do you mean by sensitivity?
Well, sensitivity to characterizing these methods, like there are certain features in there where I had to think quite hard if this, how to evaluate it. And I can imagine that if you would build a meta-analysis on top of this, in a way, it's a bit dependent on how well you code all this, or there's any
Yeah, of
code
course.
reliability or not, or that kind of things. Is that also did that play a role in SQP or not? Or
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it would be a bit weird to study the measurement error in questions and then pretend that there's no measurement error in the codes, right? Those are just questions again. Well, there was a lot of effort to try to create the best coding possible. I can say something about that, but at the same time, of course, in the end, there's still some uncertainty maybe about those codes. But I think it's important to stress that SQP is the P in SQP is predictor, right? So we're trying to predict whether if you give me a question, I can say something about how good it will be. So for prediction, I think that random measurement error, right? It will worsen the prediction, but I'm not trying to say that these characteristics are causing the quality of the question, right? So for the prediction, I think it's not necessarily as large a problem that there might be still some uncertainty in the codes. Of course, you try to get the best characteristics. There was a lot of attention paid to that, and you try to get the codes as good as possible. And there was also a lot of attention paid to that. Again, was mostly organized by Irmtraut. What they did was they had always 2 people code each question. And then if there were any discrepancies, there was a computer program, which I made, where you could see what the differences were. And it would highlight those differences. And then they would sit down and talk and come to a consensus. And that talk was led by Irmtraut, who created the coding system. So she knew how the codes were supposed to be created. And of course, there was a very extensive protocol for each coder and so on. So that's how they try to get the codes as good as possible.
okay.
Maybe I can add a few things from my perspective. So I joined the entire SQP project, not here at GESIS 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, but actually already, well, actually the year when Daniel left, I joined. So I believe around 2011 must have been. I was also doing my master's with Willem, and then started my PhD in Barcelona, and I got involved in the SQP project. First, because I had to code German questions. So whenever you see authorized predictions, I guess in in German for Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, there are chances that some of them are mine. And then I also started training other native speakers. So we were always trying to find people, mainly very often it was student assistants, that were natives in the languages we had there. So that really it's people that know the language and can code it in a better way than if it's just a second language for me. And there as well, we also always had these review sessions where we then discussed differences and codings. And it's true that maybe sometimes there are codings where you also do need to discuss, and maybe it is not clear whether, for example, whether a concept is theoretically bipolar or unipolar. There are a lot of cases where it's very easy to say yes or no, it's unipolar or bipolar, but there might be some cases in certain languages where maybe you need to discuss this a little bit more, right? And we did that. And so I think in general, we did a lot of effort in trying to assure that the codes are as good as they can be with human coders. And that leads me to my next point, that thinking about the importance of the different features or of the different characteristics in predicting, so how they add to the underlying model. The ones that are most important are actually, I think, not as problematic in terms of coding. So the ones that have more importance in the prediction are things like number of categories, number of fixed reference points, it's the domain, it's the concept. So it's not necessarily things that we were sometimes struggling with in the coding process.
Yeah, one example, but we can go to our case study maybe in a minute or so. One example where I thought for a long time, but it could very much be me. There was a question: to what extent are you concerned about data being stolen, something like that. And then the answer skills were not concerned, a little bit concerned, concerned, very concerned. And I was thinking, is this bipolar or is this unipolar? I thought for a long time about this. And I wasn't really sure. Would that kind of coding then be influential or not? Or you would say, no, this is not a the size.
It's unipolar.
Unipolar. Okay, well, that's very good. I made that decision eventually, so I did the right
Perfect.
thing.
Okay. Barry, I think this is also an important point, that the first time that you code, you have all kinds. For first time you sit down, you don't read the manual, and you just sit down and you start doing it.
Yeah.
Am I right?
No.
Oh,
No, because the
most people
SQP
don't read.
system has a very directly underneath the question, you get a whole block of examples, and that I always looked at it, but maybe again I'm not
But in any case, so it's you think you try to go on intuition, but then after a while you realize that there is a specific definition and a specific protocol for the coding, and once you get the hang of that, it's really done within a few minutes. But the first time you do it, it can take, some people even take half an hour.
So let me show you some of the results that we got for the case study. So I'm now logged into SQP. Here are the questions that actually 4 questions. So if I click on this, I hope. So there are three codings, slightly different. What about the quality? Is 0.51, 0.478? Should I be concerned here? Is this, what do you think? Are these reasonable values? I'm actually the coordinator of this survey from which we took these questions, so I should be worried if the quality is not so good. So we can of course look into a bit more detail here.
Maybe a few general things before, and then Daniel can go more into detail. These values, I would not interpret in a direct way. I would not say, okay, 0.5 is a bad quality, even though quality ranges between 1 and 0, right? So what I would do is more compare, if you have like different versions of the same item, let's say, I would compare across these versions and then use that as a tentative suggestion of which version would be better, keeping in mind that SQP is not able to say anything about how respondents actually understand your question. So this is really only referring to the formal linguistic characteristics. So you still need whatever cognitive pretesting or other kinds of methods in order to make sure that respondents actually understand your question and are able to answer it. Just as a little preliminary advice, I guess. And then the second thing I wanted to say is that also these quality estimates, they depend highly on the domain and the concept. And the domain and the concept are not things that you can change, because these are the things that you're interested in, that you want to study. So you want to study something in the field of national politics, let's say, and the concept you're measuring is a feeling, well, then you cannot change it, right? So this is already something that determines the quality to quite some extent. So I wouldn't be too worried about it in that sense. Daniel.
Yeah.
Whether you should be worried. Well, I think that, well, I mean, I can't answer your question really. Is it reasonable that 50% of the variance in the answers to this question would be not because of the actual thing that you are asking here. In this case, it's whether they will participate in a CBS survey which asks them to let their location be tracked for statistics on roads, public transport, and travel behavior. Is that reasonable? I think it sounds reasonable, but I don't know. Yeah, 50%. I think it's on the low side, but it's not atypical.
Okay, that's good to know, because we already did the survey. But
Yeah.
We had a bit of hesitation about the answer options. This question is actually part of a matrix question. It's the first in matrix question where we repeat the same question, not just for location tracking, but web tracking, physical activity tracking, and so on. It's more of the same, but slightly different with each question.
How
And
many people who say yes actually participate?
the study had a hypothetical question, that is this one, and then afterward they had to do it. So there was an actual willingness as well, because once they said yes, they were invited to do so.
Right.
But we were
And did they?
hesitant about the answer option. So we said yes, maybe, no, do not know. This is what we had right here. Simple, very simple. Might not even call it continuous, I don't know. But so we originally had another.
Yeah.
This was
A
where we
different
started.
version.
Absolutely yes, probably yes, maybe, probably no, absolutely no. It's the only change that we made.
Yeah.
And it looks like that quality slightly better. If at all, this is a big change. So yeah, of course, then the question for me would be, did we go in the wrong direction? So we moved from 5 to 3 point plus a don't know, essentially. Should we have stayed with this one?
3, 4, right? This is 4. Okay.
Absolutely,
Oh,
yes.
5, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's what you said.
It
I
looks like validity
understood it
is
the other way
higher.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is what I mean. This is what you get from the prediction. What I know from the previous analysis, although this is a new analysis, but it's the same data, mostly the same data. So I expect there won't be that many differences. Is usually when you have more, when you're asking only a single thing and you give people some range to think about, and you also fix the endpoints of that range, that's usually good, at least in the prediction for the method effect, so less method effect. And the reason for that is that there's a theoretical reason for that, actually. The reason for that is that, or theoretically, the reason for that is that if you fix the endpoints, then you don't allow so many different choices among different people in how they are going to map their opinion onto the answer scale. So, and these different choices, they will generate method effect. So I can still give a good answer, but if I do it in my own very idiosyncratic way, then that will generate a randomness that you can't really analyze, right? As a researcher, even though I answered the question in a perfectly reasonable way. But if there's really no space to maneuver for myself in how I map my opinion to a answer scale, then it's more likely that different people will do it in the similar way. And so you don't get that variance in the answers. And that's why it's usually these fixed reference points are usually most impactful on the method effect.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of the quality, which is the square, it's maybe it looks like a small difference, but I think if you look at the validity coefficient, it's big change, right? It's like 6.6
Validity
to
went up and
0.7.
reliability went slightly down. If you go to 5-point, validity is higher and the reliability is
Right.
lower.
Because I could just have some inherent uncertainty, like, is it supposed to be absolutely no or probably no?
Yeah.
Right. So that generates a bit more unreliability.
Now this question is positioned on the 9th. It's the 9th question, maybe. And in the survey questionnaire, we also were a bit hesitant about where to put this block of questions, because we first like to know a bit more about the person, their lifestyle, how digital they are, what kind of concerns they have, and so on, and then ask them. And we were a little bit uncertain whether we first just ask this and then later on ask for the concerns. We were not really sure. I didn't really do this in SQP, but is position in the questionnaire a very influential feature in the predictions?
So historically, yes. Historically, position was one, if not the most important feature. But in the new prediction algorithm, we decided to take it out as one of the variables for the prediction algorithm. And this is due to the setup of these experiments. So the MTMM experiments, they repeat the same question, or they have 3 versions of the same question. And the way these experiments were set up in the ESS, and please correct me, Daniel, if I'm wrong, but you have the main questionnaire and then you have a supplementary questionnaire. And one version is in the main questionnaire and the other one in the supplementary questionnaire. And then there's the split ballot design and so on and so forth. And I would expect that the better version of the question to be in the main questionnaire, where most respondents actually also go through it. And then in the supplementary questionnaire, maybe the version of the question that you experimented with, and maybe you made it from your own perspective, maybe a little bit worse, I don't know. But so we were not sure whether this position effect is an artifact due to the experiment itself and how this was designed, or whether it was really the position. And for that reason, we took it out of the prediction model because it was so influential. Don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's also a different potential solution to that problem, which was in the earlier versions. You can remember for each question whether it was in the supplementary or the main questionnaire, and then use that in the prediction model, but at the time of coding, always set it to main questionnaire. So I think that's a way to try to control for this effect. But this is also a reasonable thing to do. So, right, so the idea is that you would want to make use of the variation within the experiments of where the main questionnaire questions were placed within the questionnaire. So that position is useful information that you could also use here. But you do not want that, well, what Lydia just said, right? So you don't want the high positions or the lower positions, later positions, to just be reflective of this is the alternative version that we didn't choose to use in the final version of the main questionnaire. So yeah, that's why position was in the previous version, but isn't, I guess, in the current version.
Yeah, another aspect, I guess, is also that, let's say that a certain position would be the best position for your item. Even then, it's impossible to put all your items in that position. So it's a little bit similar to, it's not like domain and concept, which is fixed. Of course, you can change positions, but one item cannot be at the same place of another item. So I guess there's only so much variation you can do.
But it could be that after a certain position, you would say, well, now it's deteriorating very fast. You know, in essence, of course, the length of question, there's always a discussion. There's always too many questions, I guess, at least at official statistics. So maybe you could also, maybe I shouldn't ask the question. That's another, of course, decision you could.
Well, then the quality is 0.
The quality is 0. Yeah, maybe you should answer a question somewhere else or in another context. Well, maybe one final thing. So we had, but I had the Dutch version in here. This is question number 10. It's a bit of it's a question about how concerned people are, and very close. You know, it seems that Dutch has slightly a different value than the English. But the question I'd like to ask is that cross-country comparison has always been important, right, in SQP. For example, I know in the early days, the European Social Survey and SQP were linked to each other sometimes. Do you know whether there are many cross-country studies that try to use SQP and see whether they sort of have some sort of, how would you say that, equivalence between countries? Is that something that people would do, or?
Yeah, so that was done in the European Social Survey. Actually, the person who knows most about that is Diana Zavala, who was doing that, leading that task for some years. But in the European Social Survey, there are different countries, approximately 30 different countries, but there are even more different languages because, of course, every country can have several languages, and they can be overlapping and so on. And those translations can also be different. So the Swiss German translation doesn't have to be the same as the German translation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine as long as they're asking the same question in an equivalent way. But it's not fine if they change the content or some aspect of the question that makes it not equivalent. And to check that, these translations were coded in SQP, and then the codes were compared again with that program I mentioned earlier. And if so, certain differences are acceptable, like for example, the number of words and syllables and stuff like that. It can all be different, of course, but you shouldn't have a different topic and a different answer skill and so on. So that's something that was done. And I don't know if they looked at the actual quality predictions. Do you know that, Lydia?
I did that now on a project with Barbara, actually, but I'm not sure whether they did it there. So
okay, so you did it, yeah.
We did it, yeah. But well, what I can say from our meta-analysis that we did for the new prediction algorithm, language does play a role in predicting the quality. Country did not make it among the first spots of feature importance, but language, yes. And maybe one thing to think about also is that, as Daniel said, there can be different versions within the same language. And when I was coding the different German versions, I also noticed that, and maybe even they are the same in terms of the coding, but maybe they just changed one word, right? So this you would not detect in the coding, most probably. except for maybe one syllable missing, or I don't know what, things like that, but you would most probably not detect it, but could still make a difference in the way respondents understand the question. And then you would have differences also in across languages, maybe in the quality prediction.
Yeah, when coding these questions, you know, I realized there's the number of words, the number of syllables, the number of nouns, the number of sentences, all these kind of things that could change when you go from one language to the other. But there was also a feature, I'm not sure if I can describe it in the right way, but it was something like how vague the noun is, like a sort of like
Abstract.
Abstract, exactly.
Abstract nouns.
Like the word data, for example, is a bit of an abstract word. Would you think that as these kind of sort of abstract words are a bit language, country, cultural dependent? Could that also be changed in that kind of things?
Yeah, it's possible, but it's also just possible that some concepts are more vague in one culture than in another. Right? There's always the famous example of words that exist in one country and not in another.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. So all the words for rain we have in the Netherlands and England.
Yeah.
That they maybe don't have in Morocco.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So if you go to the Netherlands and you say rain, people are like, yeah, what kind of rain?
Yeah.
You see? So it's possible. It's possible that there are non-equivalences that are just there. That can't be prevented.
So suppose I would be in such a setting. I have to ask a question about rain. You know, actually, it is quite bad over here. So, and for some strange reason, I also want to ask that in Morocco. I have no other word. I have only one word, and in the Netherlands, I have to choose. Would you sort of see that over here? I mean, would it come up as something that would be predictive, or?
I don't think so. Not at the moment, no, because I think it's just you just translate rain as rain, and it's both considered a concrete noun and not an abstract noun. Then there's no difference in the coding.
Okay.
But I can imagine that something is an abstract noun in one country and a concrete noun in another.
Okay, it's good to know.
By the way, I looked up your question about what position influence was of position in the past. And in the old version, so that I think is the meta-analysis that Annette Scherpenzeel did. It was good for the validity and not so great for the reliability. To be in the beginning of the questionnaire.
I can imagine reliability is more and more sort of related maybe to concentration and being fatigue sort of could be right. Okay.
Yeah.
If you have a super respondent, it can never get tired, then it doesn't really matter that much. Or
something like that. Maybe. It's just a prediction, right? So
Lydia, in SQP at 3.0, are there new features? Has it changed in that respect?
So features in the sense of characteristics, no, they have not changed. They're still the same. What has changed is that we excluded position from the prediction model, but you still have to code it though. But I would say this is a minor change. But of course, these characteristics, you could always say, it's a little bit what I heard also from when you were talking earlier, right? There's like, but couldn't you have more context? Like if the question before that question was on the same topic or not, and like these kind of things and ordering effects, these like things that you were already hinting at, which are currently not covered. So you could always think about changing also this coding scheme or coming up with new characteristics that are missing from the list. So this list is not exhaustive. It's is a selection based on theory and literature that is out there. And you could now, with new methodologies, you could also think about coming up also with new characteristics that could feed into the into the prediction algorithm. So especially when you think of large language models and artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, maybe we could also come up with new characteristics that we haven't thought of yet. Yeah, and this is, I think, one thing for the future, to think about other characteristics we can maybe get from the question text itself in order to predict more things, or not in order to predict more things. I mean, to predict the quality, but based on a more holistic picture.
Yeah, I noticed that in the coding there is not something about the type of device that you're using. And I know that, of course, let's say the last 10 years or so, online questionnaires on a quite a large scale moved to all kinds of devices, smaller, larger, tablets, smartphones, and so on. I know from experience that especially things like the length of questions, how you introduce the introductions, it all have to fit on these smaller screens. Has that had an impact on predictions, or should it have an impact on predictions, you think?
So I think it should have an influence on an impact on the prediction, but we don't know yet, because in order to predict that, we need, if we want to follow the same logic of SQP, we need experiments that change these features, the devices and things like that, in order to implement it, to code it, and then to come up with a new model. Yeah, but historically, we had mostly paper and pencil questionnaires, and we do have in SQP, is there an interviewer? Is there no interviewer? Is it self-administered? Well, okay, that's the same. But I mean, there are like a few things, whether people see the questionnaire or just hear it, like that get you into a certain direction. But all these new developments, let's say, at the moment, SQP cannot predict, because it's based on data that was not collected with these methods or these devices.
I hear a call
for yes, call for action, or call to action.
And I heard, but maybe I'm not right, that there are initiatives right now to try, maybe through machine learning, to code questions almost, well, maybe semi-automatically. So you would sort of apply machine learning tactics to code and then maybe adjust. Is that true or not? Is that too far in the future?
Yeah, so actually that was one idea, to make it easier for the user by implementing machine learning methods to at least code the characteristics. We are currently working on or let's put it like this: the way it is programmed at the moment, it makes it very difficult for us to implement these nice ways of improving the user experience. So what we're doing at the moment is we are trying to re-implement and create, so to say, reprogram the software, so that in the future we are able to implement these type of things. This is on the software development side. And then on the content side, we're working together with Matthias Schonlau from the University of Waterloo and his PhD student, Tiancheng Yang. The idea was to actually predict these codes. But now we very quickly went from trying to do that to predicting the quality of the question directly from the text without using the codes. And the large language model that they built is very good in doing so. It's almost as good, or it's I don't want to say almost as good, because it is as good, but I mean, it is very similar to the random forest model that is implemented at the moment. So okay. In my vision of the future of SQP, we would probably have two different types of predictions. One prediction that is still based on the codes, ideally many of these codes being already auto-suggested by the system, that then maybe you can override if you disagree. But so that you as the user, you don't have to code as many things anymore. And then a second prediction that is based on LLMs that gives you directly a value. But always, I mean, it's always a black box, right? You don't really know what's happening in there.
No.
So I also imagine that people might be hesitant to use that one. But I think in future, we probably will try to provide those two different models for predicting the quality.
So that's a good reason to keep following SQP. I have one final question. It's a little bit related to the future as well. Maybe going back to your professor chair, Daniel. So, you know, we can ask questions, but we can also, of course, also try measure concepts in different ways. For example, we can try to derive sentiments from social media, like what people feel about certain events in the world or whatever, how concerned they are through their expressions. Would that be a future that these kind of measures get into these kind of predictions?
Well, we're already working on trying to estimate to put it in these terms, the quality of these types of measures. So Qishang Fang, who recently defended his dissertation, he has worked on that and is still working on that as well. I know that Claudia Wagner at GESIS has also published some things about that.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, I think measures derived from digital trace data are no different from survey questions in the sense that they're supposed to measure some kind of social scientific construct, and they might do so in a better or a worse way.
Mm-hmm.
That has been recognized in itself. What maybe hasn't been recognized is this aspect of random and systematic measurement error. So, for instance, some years ago, we observed that if you use different models for personality computing, as it's called, that's a whole field in data mining literature, which is very optimistically called personality computing, not estimation, but computing. So you feed it in some text and it gives you some ocean scores, for example, right? Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay. 3 stars for me. If you feed it a bunch of tweets, you have then many of these models will output scores for the 5 different ocean constructs, which correlate plus and minus 1 with each other. So I don't mean across the models. I mean the openness score correlates perfectly with the conscientiousness score. So what does it mean? It means that they are just looking for, these models are just observing that certain words are used or not used, or they use the same patterns, right? And they give different numbers maybe, but they correlate perfectly or almost perfectly. And nobody thought to check that. I think that's a clear indication that these models are not useful for those applications. But it doesn't involve any ground truth. Right, and I think there's something where we can also bring our know-how to machine learning field, because in machine learning there's a lot of emphasis on so-called ground truth, which is then often in scientific terms not so truth. And of course, in social science we have a lot of experience with trying to estimate how good some measure is, even when we're not sure what the perfect measure is. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And you're right. If we were able to do that for a lot of different types of models, different types of input data, text, but maybe also different types of text, but also video, audio, who knows, other kinds of modalities, location data, you name it, right? And try to build up a database that way, we could do something similar. But we're very far from that, because at the moment we're still at the point of even trying to convince others that the scores that you derive from digital trace data are supposed to measure something, and that this measurement might not be perfect, and this is important for subsequent research, and there might be some systematic errors there as well, and so on and so forth. So that's the battle we're in right now. And once we get a bit further in that, I think we can start thinking about SQP for digital traces.
Yeah, maybe just a last sentence or remark. I know that the statistical offices, they are very worried about stability, concept drift and all of these kind of things. So you derive sentiments at year T, and then T plus 5
Yeah.
sentiments
Right.
have different expressions already. Would that be something as well? You can sort of do something about concept drift in this respect.
Yeah, I think if you have the idea behind validity, the word validity.
Mm-hmm.
So in SQP, the word validity has a very specific technical meaning, which I was never completely happy with, to be completely honest. I think I'm allowed to say that now. That's why I try to use the term method effect more than validity, because it's more reflective of the narrow definition, right, of validity in the SQP's terminology than I think the word validity. But the idea of validity is that if you find a way to measure something, it should work in different contexts. It should work across time as well, and that's the type of measurement we're trying to find, right? We're trying to find measures that are not affected by concept drift. So that's the reason for doing this kind of study. That are not, and that will work also in different populations, for example. And if you go to one subpopulation, it's not suddenly completely different, right? It's just validity is just generalization to unseen situations. So what I'm hoping to show in the future is not just that I can do clever experiments with digital trace data, but that if I use those experiments to improve the measures, then they generalize better and can be used in different contexts as well. So that we can actually, keep drawing conclusions and have some scientific basis for those on the digital traces beyond the data that we're used to evaluate in that specific context. That's from my perspective, that's something that's really missing from a lot of the applications that I see of digital traces in social science and probably also visual statistics.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear. There is definitely still conceptually and also practically still quite some steps to make, and so actually I learned a lot from reading a bit of the literature and the SQP software system. It made me think once again about the questions that we use, for example, in this particular case study. So I'll keep following you, and of course also the developments in these systems. So I'd like to thank you for be willing to do this interview and to give a bit of explanation and background to all of this. And so I would recommend everyone to have a look, try it for themselves.
I would like to use this opportunity, of course, to thank you. Thank you for giving us the space to talk about it here. But I also want to use the opportunity for another call to action, which is not use the software. Yes, that's also very important. But more importantly, you out there, if you're interested in these topics and you feel like either you want to conduct an MTMM experiment in your study and to donate your data so we can improve the prediction algorithm, please contact us. If you feel like you're interested in not only predicting, but in explaining, so this is also one big hot topic out there. What do we do with the quality prediction? How do we know what we have to change in our question in order to get a better question? Feel free to collaborate with us and contact us. If you have ideas on how to automate some of these codings, feel free to contact us. We are very happy to collaborate on many different levels. So yeah, just this call to action. We are open for any kind of cooperation and are looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lydia. Well, we'll share contact details with anyone listening. So thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thanks, Barry.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was it for this edition of the ESRA Short Movie. I learned a lot today. I hope you did too. Please check our other movies at europeansurveyresearch.org.